Monster Guys present a Yokai Podcast presentation, bringing to life, through short stories and informative discussion, the strange, the beautiful, the whimsical, and the mystery of Japanese yokai.
Now please enjoy a story about
The Tanuki, and a story titled The Tanuki Stew, adapted from a classic story titled Kachi-kachi Yama, narrated by C. Michael McGannon, presented by the Monster Guys.
The old man lay in wait, watching the trap eagerly. He was hungry, and it had been some time since he and his wife had enjoyed any real meat with their dinner. A rustling through the leaves caused his heart to jump with excitement, and he crouched down so as not to frighten off any potential catch. There was a loud snap, and the rope flew upward from the forest floor. A rabbit flailed, suspended from a tree. The farmer gasped and ran to the creature. Sorry, he cried, working at the knot around the rabbit's leg. Here, Usagi-san, I'll get you down. The rabbit, seeing his friend, the farmer, stopped struggling, although his small chest shook with the excitement between his heart and lungs. Oh dear, I thought I was done for. Lucky it was I that caught you, and not another, the farmer said. He let the rabbit down to the ground gently. Be safe, Usagi-san. The rabbit nodded. Although forgetful sometimes, he was a clever creature when determined. He gave a brief farewell and went foraging away from his friend. The man, however, reset his trap, his stomach growling even deeper than before. It was not long before another animal wandered by. This time, when the trap was triggered, the creature hit its head on the ground and swung unconscious through the air. The old man jumped up with joy when he saw it was a thick raccoon dog, or tanuki. They would eat well tonight. He made it back home in haste, tying the tanuki up in the kitchen by its feet. His wife was equally excited when she walked in. Tonight, she told him, we shall have stew. About that time, the tanuki woke up, his head throbbing with a headache. He saw that he was trapped and began to panic. Let me go, he cried. Here, if you let me go, I will bring you many great riches. But the husband refused. He knew that tanuki were mischievous creatures, clever and generally untrustworthy. That, and he was still hungry. He left to run a quick errand. Let me go, the tanuki pleaded to the old woman. I am meaty and probably taste very good, yes, but if you let me go, I will catch for you 100 fish. Surely that would feed you both for a long period of time. Feeling pity for the creature and agreeing that 100 fish would provide quite a few meals, she cut the tanuki's ties and let him down. With a terrible snarl, the tanuki jumped upon the old woman and strangled her to death. Hours later, the husband returned. Never had his wife cooked something with such a wonderful aroma. Already hungry, his mouth watered as he sat down with a bowl of stew. His wife watched him and smiled sweetly, urging him to eat. So hungry was he, the old man didn't even notice that she refrained from eating her own bowl of stew. The meat was more delicious than anything he had eaten in months, rich, almost sweet. Several ravenous spoonfuls in, the old woman began to laugh, but her voice was deeper than ever, and her teeth were small and sharp. You didn't even notice, you old fool. The farmer shrunk back, growing nervous as his wife changed shape in front of him, becoming smaller and much furrier, until the tanuki sat in her place. Where is my wife, you devilish beast? Cried the farmer. In the stew, of course. What did you think you were eating? The truth hit the farmer with such ferocity that he was stunned into silent immobility, and he could only sit there in horror as the tanuki got up and exited the house, laughing the entire way. You should have never caught me, the raccoon dog called over his shoulder. The husband starved himself for the next few days, grieving over the loss of his wife and the horrible trick that had been played upon him. And that is how the rabbit found him. The small, long-eared animal had come to visit his friends, the farmer and his wife, bringing with him a feast of fruits and vegetables. However, when he saw the red-rimmed, maddened eyes of his friend, the rabbit rushed to ask what had happened. When he heard the farmer's tale, he grew impassioned. "I will find this Tanuki and avenge her," he told the man. "Be sure of it." The next day, the Tanuki was out fishing when he heard the sounds of a struggle nearby. Curious, he got up and found a small rabbit carrying a bundle of wood on its back. The Tanuki, thinking of what prank he could play upon the rabbit, jumped out of the bushes. "Greetings, friend. Here, let me help you with that. It looks quite heavy." The rabbit, panting for breath, made no argument and gave up the load. "Where to, friend?" asked the Tanuki. The rabbit pointed, still short of breath. "My house. It's right up ahead." The Tanuki nodded and carried the bundle along, following the rabbit. Although it was not terribly heavy, he quickly started to sweat. "Has it gotten warmer?" asked the Tanuki. "No, not terribly," the rabbit said, not looking back. "Thank you for the help, by the way." The Tanuki huffed. "My pleasure. But it really does seem to be getting warmer. Wait, do you hear that? That sounds like..." "A crackling fire?" the rabbit laughed. "Yes, I have a fire burning in front of my cottage, which we're close to by now. You probably hear that. I'm cooking stew." The Tanuki couldn't speak at that point. He was feeling lightheaded from a sudden increase in heat. It grew so hot, in fact, that his back and tail felt like they were catching fire. He yelped, for, sure enough, the wood he was carrying had indeed caught fire. "Oh my!" cried the rabbit, finally turning around. The Tanuki had shrugged off the bundle, but it was too late. His back was badly burned, the fur missing. "Quick, to my cabin. I have a poultice that will help," the rabbit told him. Leaving the still smoldering wood behind, the rabbit led the Tanuki quickly to his cabin. A large fire was outside, a tub of water next to it. "Wait here for a moment." The rabbit hopped inside, coming back out a few moments with a jar of some creamy substance. He opened the jar and handed it to the Tanuki. "This will help cool your burns," he told the raccoon dog. The Tanuki snatched it from his hand, dumping the entire jar down his back. But instead of cooling him down, it only burned more, and he howled in pain. "What is this?" He looked at the jar, mortified when he read the label. It was pepper jelly. "Oh my!" the rabbit exclaimed once more. "I grabbed the wrong jar. I am so sorry. Quick, jump into the water. It's sure to cool you down." Thinking only of how his skin burned, the Tanuki dove headfirst into the large tub of water in front of the rabbit's house. He breathed heavily, relief spreading its way down his back. Quickly, the rabbit put a giant lid over the tub and pushed it over the fire, locking it into place. "Tonight," the rabbit thought to himself, ignoring the angry shouts of the Tanuki, "I think I shall have stew."
The Tanuki's Stew is a story that is adapted from a classic tale, Kachi-kachi Yama. And I think it should be noted that the Tanuki, and we may have spoken about this previously on our Yokai podcast when we did another story about the Tanuki, but I think it's worth noting that the Tanuki is one of the more important and prominent animals in folklore, and especially with regards to yokai and Japanese culture in many ways.
Yeah, we've talked about the kitsune often, and I think that is probably the most important animal. You know, the cat, the fox, and raccoon dog all being very important. I feel like the kitsune is probably the most important, and the tanuki is probably the second most important. I mean, it even goes so far to infiltrate their language, like the Japanese language and different phrases and beauty ideals. I don't know how true this stands to modern day, but back in the day, if you will, a woman's beauty might be considered to be kitsune-like or fox-like, more slender and pointed, or it may be more like a tanuki, more round-faced. So they were a very important part of the culture and still are to this day.
Yeah, and it seems that the more you visit places in Japan, you kind of can't go anywhere without encountering a tanuki somewhere. They're very popular, and even in storytelling, a lot of times the tanuki gets mixed up or interchanged with kitsune and other animals as well. I think a story we did about the Mujina is one of those stories that goes back and forth, and the same with the kitsune, and so they're very prominent, very important, and sometimes even considered interchangeable.
Yes. In fact, we talked about this being a classic story. There are many different adaptations of this story, and several of those adaptations say that it's not even a tanuki, but a mujina or a badger that this story is talking about. In the original tale, it definitely is a tanuki, a raccoon dog. A lot of that misconception comes from when Western fairy tale collectors were collecting Japanese stories, and there was a big mix-up with the translation of tanuki and mujina and badger and raccoon dog as they were trying to explain what this animal was to people in the West. This is an interesting story because most of the time, tanuki are seen as mischievous, jolly, generally good-natured, just kind of little pesky pranksters. But this is one of those rare stories, and there are a few others out there where they are just outright villains.
Yeah, they've turned to the dark side, so to speak, in some of these stories.
Yes. This particular story, like I said, there are a lot of different variations, and it varies greatly in the severity of the tanuki's actions. We tried to, for the adaptation, keep it light and not get too sick and twisted on the podcast.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely still disturbing to think about.
And there is a variation in the ending of this story in a couple of different versions of this story. Walk us through some of the variations in the endings and some of those elements of stories past that have changed, especially with regards to this adaptation.
Oh, right. Okay, so the ending on this is actually completely original to, the monster guys. Originally, and there are different variations as far as the different challenges that the tanuki and rabbit go through, but the rabbit kind of shows up in the middle of the story, like many, fables and folktales often have characters that just appear out of nowhere. And he promises to avenge the old couple. For the most part, it's the same. He does burn the tanuki's back with the bundle of sticks, and actually the tanuki asks, what's that crackling fire that I hear? And that's where the story gets its name. The rabbit answers, well, that's Kachi-kachi Yama, which means, crackling fire mountain, which I guess was a big mountain that was just on fire. And he says, we're close by this mountain, so of course it sounds like, fire crackling to you. After that, he does get the burns on his back. The rabbit gives him the poultice to soothe his wounds, but it turns out to be pepper. And after that, the tanuki kind of gets fed up and challenges the rabbit to a duel or a competition of boating. Kind of like the Three Little Pigs, they both go about this a different way. The rabbit makes his boat of wood, and the tanuki, although clever animals, tanukis are kind of short-sighted sometimes and just kind of goofy and forgetful. They actually, this guy made a boat of mud and clay. So they both go out to sea and they start the race, and it's going along just fine. And then the boat made of mud starts to melt and, fall apart, of course. So the rabbit takes the opportunity to lift the oar over his head and strike the tanuki down, saying, I was a friend of that farmer. And he delivers the final blow before the tanuki is lost under the sea forever. So the story here that we adapted it to makes it a bit more of a full circle, I think. But that original story almost has a different epic clash of its own.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I find interesting about some of these stories and with Japanese culture, and it's true in other cultures as well, but I think most definitely in Japanese culture and storytelling is just how fluidly the animals interact with humans and vice versa. In conversation, in behavior, in actions. And it's always just so whimsical and interesting to me to come across stories like this one where, the rabbit just comes right out talking and the humans are talking back just like they're pals ready to go get a drink.
Yes, we actually found for this story while doing research, trying to find some of the older translations, a children's book that shows the rabbit and the tanuki both being in full clothing. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I just recently read The Dream Hunters, the Sandman series, Neil Gaiman and P. Craig Russell's version of this graphic novel that you gave me to read. And in that, the fox was very much interactive with the humans and the other animals as well. And you just see it course through these stories that are set in Japan and in this culture. It's just very well accepted that animal life and human life are very much connected and interactive with each other. And again, I just just always find that very fun. Sometimes it's dangerous. Sometimes it doesn't turn out so well for one or the other, but it's still just very interesting to follow and see that interaction. You don't get a lot of that kind of storytelling in the West always.
Yeah, very much so. And I'm glad that you point that out as well, especially with this story, because, talking about Japanese folk tales, I think most people who are familiar with Japanese stories know about the kitsune and know about the tanuki and the mujina and, the neko or the cat. But this one actually brings out the rabbit as well. So it's fun to be reminded that it's not all about the fox. It's not all about the raccoon dog or the cat. All of the other animals play just as much of the part in that ancient culture. So it's a fun reminder, and I don't know, I have this funny image of my head now of this samurai sword wielding rabbit.
Yeah.
In full kimono. It's very funny.
It's a great story, and I like the adaptation that we brought to the table here, and especially for this podcast. And we do hope that you've enjoyed the story this week on our Yokai Podcast. As always, you can find us at themonsterguys.com on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Just look us up at The Monster Guys. We'd love to hear from you and hope that you would join the conversation with us about this and the other tales that we spin here, either on the Yokai Podcast or our Fairy Tales Podcast or our main feed, the Monster Guys Podcast. We look forward to hearing from you and hope you have a great week. Stay tuned this week because we actually have a little bit of a bonus for you coming tomorrow. So take care. Until then, good night.
Good night.